Hey there, hope you're having a good day. Today we are talking about blueprints, classes, and subclasses. Um, it's really important, and if you've been learning Unreal, you've probably heard the word blueprint so much it's lost all meaning. Well, I'm hoping to explain why it's so important and how you should be using it. And I've been learning Unreal for a couple years at this point. One of my frustrations with a lot of the guides out there is they explain what something is, how to technically plug it in, but I always feel like it's missing the part of how to use it, and more importantly, how you should use it to get the most out of it. I'm hoping that these guides I make will help with that and maybe teach you something that I've learned. Um, I'm going to focus on the practical use and include some real examples to hopefully give you what you need to make your game that you're trying to make. A blueprint, and part of the reason why you've heard the word so much is it's actually two things. It is Unreal's visual coding that lets you write code without knowing how to write code. Very useful. Lets you connect different nodes together and create code without writing any. It's great. I've been really happy with it. But the other thing it is, which I would argue is probably more important, is it's a logical class system. A blueprint can be a child of another blueprint, or itself can have children, right? A blueprint is also a thing in your game. A blueprint could be a spoon in your game, right? A spoon, a utensil. So you might logically create that to be like a blueprint called utensil, and then create a child blueprint called spoon. A child blueprint of utensil, another one called fork, another one called knife. And so your tree would look like utensil at the top with 3 lines coming out of it, connecting to spoon, fork, and knife. Just as a rough example of how you should logically think about your game, because you'd have functionality shared between the utensils, but a spoon is going to act different from a fork, which will act different from a knife. So you need to look at your blueprints in that way. Where is the functionality? What are these things doing? And where do those common parts kind of join so that you can shape your tree in a way that makes sense? And the reason it's so valuable is it's going to save you a lot of time, because you only have to make the functionality once if you set it up correctly. I'm going to quickly talk about the blueprint interface inside of a blueprint, and then I'm going to share an example of what I just described of setting things up logically, and to tell you how you should do it, basically. Okay, so let's get started here. So I've got a blueprint pulled up in a game I've been working on. This blueprint, you can see at the top, is named BP JRPG character. Some important spaces in this interface. Over here, class settings. This is where you configure the parent class, which usually don't come here and change it. It can cause issues here because usually you're creating a child of a parent. You don't come here and change it. You'll get some warning messages when you do that because you shouldn't do that under normal circumstances, but it's there. And also, this is where you implement interfaces. Okay. As you learn to use blueprints and to write in this blueprint area, which is where the code lives, you'll learn the importance of interfaces, but that's where it is under class settings. Then we have the initial values of the class here. Another very important space. where all of these default values that make your class work, all the variables that you set up, all the different components that have variables, that's what this is. Most of this, you're probably not even going to look at. It's important to know it's there. There's a search bar at the top. But usually you want to approach creating blueprints with addressing one thing at a time, one bit of functionality at a time. And so you probably, I'd advise against just opening this up and going one at a time and changing stuff, because you need to know exactly what it does. And if it's not important to you what it does, why look at it? Just leave it. And then as you're developing your blueprints, you'll interact with it as needed. But it's important to know that's there, because these are the default values of the class, and you have a search bar here so you can quickly find and set default values. Okay. Your components here on the left are all the different things you can add into your blueprint from different places. For instance, if I switch over to the viewport, you can see I've added visual elements to this blueprint. So when it's created from the blueprint, when the blueprint creates it, it creates these visual things and represents it in the game world. So it does this design here when you're dragging something around like this. I have no idea why it thought I was dragging something when I just switched over here. It's kind of weird. Okay, so as an example, this blueprint right here, one good shortcut to know is F, because that just takes you to kind of center. See, I have a camera on this blueprint, and so it kind of took me to the midpoint. But if I click on like the mesh and I hit F, see how on the right. So this is the blueprint in the game world, not the one I was just showing you, but one that I've put visual elements, and you'll see that these all come into the game based on the blueprint. Okay. Okay, so that's this area. This is where you kind of build it almost like a Lego man. You're putting pieces together, right? But this here, my blueprint, this is the meat. This is where the real things happen. All of this, so you might be familiar with Event Graph. That's right here. That lives here. As a matter of fact, if I were to ever accidentally close Event Graph, just double click it over here to open it back up. Side note, if I ever accidentally close the viewport, I can go to Window at the top and choose Viewport, and it gives it back, right? And so we're done finding our bearings, okay? You've got your class settings, class defaults, your components, and then you've got the meat. Let's talk about the meat. And here's where I'm going to give you examples, okay? I talked before about setting things up logically, so you only have to configure something once or build functionality once. This is my JRPG character. This is like the parent to every single character that I'm going to have in my game. And so I've spent quite a bit of time on this. I've created a bunch of different functions that do different things. For example, this function, if I open it up, all it does is set the character, whether or not it's dead, based on if its HP is greater than 0. That's all that function does. Refresh attributes. This is where I configure the actual mechanics of, getting the attributes and then calculating how those attributes interact with each other. And all of the different logic that you kind of need to think through when you're creating something in your game, that parent-child relationship and all of the qualities that should be assigned to the parent that will propagate downward to all the children. Because every character in my game is going to have, HP, MP, attack, defense, all of these different stats. And so I've put it here. And I put the refresh attributes here because that's an essential part of it. Inside of an event graph here, which is the default place for events, you can always create more graphs on the left by clicking New Graph. This is where events happen, such as dealing damage. This is an interface here. That's what that symbol means. And all it provides is an amount. Something else can tell this character, I'm dealing damage to you, I'm dealing this much to you. This is the amount of damage. In this case, I'll have a defense calculation that takes my current defense, does math, and then sets my HP based on how much was lost in that attack. I also have it spawn an effect when damage is dealt on the character, and then I have it play a hit reaction animation, and then check if the character is alive. You see how all of that kind of logically makes sense? Now, this function needs to apply to all the blueprints that are also characters. If I didn't do this parent-child structure that I've been talking about, I would need to copy this and paste it into all the different blueprints, which is a nightmare. That's like a waking nightmare to have to deal with that, because if you ever want to make a change to this, guess what? You have to do it everywhere. But if you properly set this up as a parent-child, I can make a change here to this event in this one spot, and it will propagate downward to all the children that inherit from this blueprint. That's the time saver. That's going to save you a ton of time. And so if I look at, if I go back to my content browser and I pull up another, let's pull up a player character. Let's pull up Giles right here. And over here on the left, I'm going to tell it to, this is probably unticked for you by default. I like it because I want to see all the variables. But if I turn this off, all the variables are gone because I turned off I just hid the inherited variables. In other words, all of this down here is coming from his parent. If I go into class settings, I can see the parent class is BP JRPG character, player character. So let's open that. Here it is. And if we do the same thing here, hide inherited variables, there's nothing, right? All of this is coming from that structure, okay? And so the parent here is this guy right here, that first one I told you that has a lot put into it. If I didn't structure it this way, like I said, I'd have to go through and put these functions on every single blueprint. But this is how you should use your blueprint system. What you want to do with your different blueprints can vary so much. It's not really possible for me to tell you how to do exactly what you want to do because there's so much you could do. But for those different pieces of functionality that you're working on, take a little bit of time and create a tree with your different parts of functionality that you want to propagate downward. Okay. So let's say you do have functionality. One last little tip, and you may already know this, but if you do have functionality that you want to be shared that doesn't necessarily follow a structured tree, you can create what's called an actor component and then add it here in components. That's one way to take just like a bundle of code and stick it on virtually any blueprint, and that will replicate to all your different blueprints. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I hope this gave you something maybe that you weren't aware of, or gave you a little bit of what you needed to get started. So let me know in the comments what you thought of this guide, and I hope you have a good day.